walk in the spirit is difficult, dealing with all of the ignorance. But in the Bible, it's still talking about the Bible. What is the benefit? Everything about you counterfeit. There ain't no rebuttal you can counter with. On the internet, you the master teacher. In real life, you powerless. Keep it real with you, I don't have time for this. I ride for this, my forefathers died for this. They cry for this opportunity presently I possess, and right now you are the opposite. If you walk in love, you fulfill the law. Don't get involved and you ain't giving it all. If you ever think it's cool to threaten another man's family, then you already lost. Chemtrails got aluminum, heavy metal saturate the atmosphere. Manhattan Project, time travel, Mandela effect, what happened here? GMO food processing to the whole world become obsolete. A black man who believes in Jesus got my own team taking shots at me. You trespassing on property that you don't fully understand properly. All the back and forth, that's not for me, that's for ROC and the War Machine. If we ride together, then we ride together. If we can't do it, I'd rather leave. I still stand on the word of God till the day I die and no longer breathe. We trapped inside the diaspora, nightmares of the massacre. Cold sweat, I'm below deck in the middle passage, just a passenger. Revolutionary hardcore, liberation, that's a hard job. You ain't ready, you a oddball. Keep your mouth closed like lockjaw. I learned trying to bring people together on the same page, make them separate. All the talk about reconciliation, when the time comes, you hesitate. If Jesus was able to sit at the table with a bunch of sinners, you very fake. Your steps ordered by the Lord, and how it was yesterday, a big mistake. We the city sitting on the hill. Guess it all depends on how you live. Guess it all depends on how you feel, and we both know that ain't God's will. I stood on what I felt was right. I don't never question if God's real. Trapped inside this matrix, I'm about to pop the red and the blue pill.
Bless them which persecute you. Bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, said the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:14-21.
You're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not Manny. I am Peyton Manning level, I'm on GOAT status. I think I'm the baddest mother lover ever walk on this planet. Damn it, you could never see me, you could never beat me, you could never be me, disrespect me, and I'm eating all of your pizza. I know I'm not right, I know I'm not white, I know I'm gon' call the popo on you if you hit me. I don't fight, I'm a rapper, I don't write. Rio, you got all that hype, that's the stuff that I don't like. Why you laughing at my height? I wish I could slap your face. You just think you're so amazing, you just think that you're the greatest. Why you fucking Tom Brady? I am Peyton Manning, end of conversation. You just hating, I am Peyton Manning, say it. I am Peyton Manning, say it. No, Dibble God playing, that's a Drake line. Beat the midget up, that's a hate crime. Baytown zone 3 game time. Got the trunk knocking from the baseline. I'm all about the money, baby, crocker cake time. Chopsticks on deck, no Shanghai. 4-5, you come to my waistline. Keep the 4-5 tip by my waistline. You soft in the middle like fruit pie. I know it hard for you to walk a straight line. You wouldn't throw trays in the food fight. Know what I heard through the grapevine. I know you don't mind wasting your time. I would just prefer you didn't waste mine. You gon' get what coming to you in due time. Little pussycat running from the K9. You're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, category, mandatory for me to tell you that you were very boring. And the moral of the story, I wish I could just ignore you, but they gotta burn your body, put you in the crematorium. And I'm the only audio inside the auditorium. And when I'm finished with you, you will not have no memorial. You wanna be Luigi, but you're not ready for Mario. And no scenario, running circles around your cardio. And that's a body blow, it's not a secret. Everybody know that you ain't coming close. I leave you comatose and you become a ghost. I overdose, I gotta overload. That's when the windows of heaven open up for me with the overflow. And I can feel the power moving within every last chromosome. Battle right around the corner, you already know it's on. Understand me, you're not paying Manny, you're not paying Manny. Woo!
Peace, peace, peace. What it is, it's Brother Tavon Sweno, a.k.a. the Orthodox Moore, a.k.a. the Seven Pillar Saracen, a.k.a. Brother Moore. Wishing you all peace and blessings. Hoping you all having a wonderful day. Today, I want to talk about something we should have been talking about for the last year and change. And that is the Ethiopian connection to the First African Baptist Church. And also that Ethiopian connection to the pews. Now, this is an important conversation, whether you're an Israelite, a non-Israelite, etc. This is an important conversation for anybody who is a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade in the Americas. And it's important to note this has been my position and the position of my other brothers in the Israelite intelligentsia, such as Anonymous Hebrew, who went down to First African Baptist Church. Like I said, supplied us with multiple pictures, supplied us with audio from his tour, supplied us with his understandings of the pews. Again, he's literate in Hebrew. He definitely said he saw cursive Hebrew on the pews. He said he saw some cursive coughs, etc. He confirmed that for me. And our consistent position has been that church is a national treasure for anybody in the diaspora who is a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade. For multiple reasons. One, you get an understanding of some of the experiences of what the people went through, etc. But two, it seems as though every aspect of the slave trade in terms of the ports or like West Africa, East Africa, etc., made it to that church. And we particularly see this on the pews and other things in the church that we're going to look at. But we see potentially multiple different scripts that would have to do with East and West Africa. Now, this is important because if you paid attention to my channel for the last year and change, you've seen me heavily focus on the East African aspect of the transatlantic slave trade, because most of us are never taught about that. And so I speak about over 500,000 slaves, 542,000 slaves, I believe, being taken from the ports of Mozambique and Madagascar. So this is important to understand because this is a large population that comes to the Americas from East Africa, from many parts of East Africa. This is important to understand when we're looking at our genetics and find out, oh, why do I have 2 and 3% Somali DNA or DNA from the Horn or Ethiopian DNA or Eritrean DNA? Like, how did that happen? How do I have the Southeastern Bantu DNA? How did that happen? Well, it didn't come out of nowhere. There's a reason why you have it, and at those high percentages, right? Because over 500,000 people came over from East Africa. Now, this is important to understand in a multitude of ways. Like, so I give this example with the Jews in India and with the Lemba and whatnot, right? Like, so with the B'nai Israel in India, They say that they came from 7 people and turned into thousands. The Limba say they came from 12 people and turned into thousands. We're talking 542,000 people, 130 to 160,000, which came to the Caribbean and to the ports of Eastern America, etc., like Charleston, etc. This is also important to understand, like, because I started looking into this because in November of 2020, I had an interview with Hamandishe, the Limba elder, whose information is streaming at the bottom of the video. So if you want to donate to the Limba directly and to his ministry, Bomb, please feel free to do so. All the information is there. That information, I believe, will work best for the Western Union right now. And so I'm working on getting an email from the Cohen so we can get the PayPal, Zoom, and etc. popping. But yeah, the moment he told me that the Limba made it on slave ships and made it to the Americas, I was like, well, let me look into that. And when I did, I was like, wow, 500,000 people plus came from from the ports of Mozambique and Madagascar. Okay, let me look into that. And then when I started looking at it, I'm like, wow, when you really look at it, fam, like, so Mozambique is being run by Portuguese people at one point in time. And at the same time, it's being run by Portuguese people. Like Angola is also being run by Portuguese people. And so when you look at the two, like, fam, like, it would seem to me that it would be easier to transport slaves over land via water than it would be water, right? So you might have both routes popping. There might be times where you take water, there might be times where you take land or whatnot, right? Across from Mozambique to Angola or from Mozambique to the Americas or whatnot. Like, so I could see where there's a lot of we see a lot of people who end up having a lot of like the Southwestern Bantu DNA also end up having a good chunk of Southeastern Bantu DNA, right? Not all the time, but some of the time, right? And this potentially is one of the reasons why, because we can see the migration from east to west through the Portuguese via multiple slave routes. Even the French at this, like, so the French did with like just straight just taking people by ships from Mozambique to Madagascar, right? The Portuguese, I'm talking about by ship and potentially also by land. So going further, it's really important to understand the Ethiopic side of this as well. And it's also important to understand the spiritual practices of the Gullah people. Because, for instance, the ones that end up practicing Christianity, their Christianity looks real different in comparison to the other Christians around them. They have real particular practices that I'm going to get into in a whole nother video. But they end up looking like Ethiopian Christians, or a cross between Ethiopian Jews and Ethiopian Christians. It's really interesting when you take a look at it. But without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to get into this presentation right quick and just break down a couple of things that you may or may not know about the church and its Ethiopic connection. Let me make sure I got the right. Yep, that's it. So first and foremost, Ethiopian Baptist Church of Jesus Christ, aka First African Baptist Church. I'm going to read that one more time. Ethiopian Baptist Church of Jesus Christ, aka First African Baptist Church. The Ethiopian connection of First African Baptist Church. This is George Liele. A lot of people hear about other members of First African Baptist Church, but a lot of people aren't hearing about George Liele. Who is George Liele? George Liele is the first African American to be ordained and first Baptist to go as a missionary to any other land, in particularly Jamaica. I'm getting all this information I'm about to read off from him. Well, not all of it, some of it. from this website here. Ooh, I forgot to. I will make sure I put this in the description below. I forgot to do so before I went live. My fault, family. But you can definitely pause this up. Let me make sure. Let me do it like this. Really make sure you can see it. Go full screen, full screen. But again, he's the first African American to be ordained and first Baptist to go as a missionary to any other land. He goes to Jamaica, right? He's born as a slave in Virginia. Liele was taken to Georgia, where he was converted in 1773 in the church of his master, Henry Sharp. He soon became concerned about the spiritual condition of his fellow slaves and began preaching to them. In 1775, he was ordained as a missionary to work among the Black population in the Savannah area. Like many other slaves, he sided with the British in the Revolutionary War, as did his master, who set Liele free in 1778. Again, all this comes from the previous website I just showed you. Let me make sure this comes. I think this comes. Yeah, this comes from a whole different website, right quick. And I will definitely make sure that I supply this website down below. I forgot to put it in my title here. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can pull it up. Nah, yeah, I'll do it after the show. But this comes from an article from 2012 about George Liele. It says Liele nevertheless took advantage of his newfound freedom, using the opportunity to widen his appeal so that despite the war and its restrictions, he soon founded the first African Baptist church in North America, named First African Baptist Church of Savannah, which he and his successors had once called the Ethiopian Baptist Church of Jesus Christ, the first church within the developing Ethiopian Baptist Church movement. The first church within the developing Ethiopian Baptist Church movement. And for a lot of people who self-identify as Israelite in this country, I would highly recommend that you start looking at stuff like this here, instead of starting your history at One West. A lot of people like to start history at One West and Abba Bivens and all them kind of things there. But when you actually really do the history of this thing, people connecting to Ethiopian, people connecting to like an Israelite concept, this far predates One West ideology, thoughts, and concepts. Far predates such. And so this is a really good example of understanding that the Ethiopian Baptist Church of Jesus Christ was the first church within the developing Ethiopian Baptist Church movement. So this Ethiopian Baptist Church movement needs to be understood. And in particular, the way that the Gullah people practice this tradition. The Gullah and the Geechee people. So again, here we go. This is a Ethiopian Baptist Church of Jesus Christ. So when it was first built, you can see where it had a really, really high, I believe that's a steeple. But you can see where people were using it as a lookout, or potential lookout, alleged lookout for the Underground Railroad. For those familiar with the history of the church, the participation in the Underground Railroad is a big aspect of the history of the church. And like I said, when Anonymous was breaking down a lot of stuff he was being told and a lot of stuff he experienced, it was a real moving experience. Like you felt it in the bones, fam. I recommend anybody that can. I haven't been able to go down there yet, and I can't wait till I can. But I recommend anybody that can go down there that you do. Particularly if you got like if you descend from the transatlantic slave trade, you should definitely go check this place out. Because this place, again, I'm not going to get into all the symbols here, but we have Bakongo symbols, right? We have 9 patch that some people say is related to northern Nigeria, etc. Right? We have writings that potentially get Ez on the pews, so that's East African, Ethiopia, whatnot, etc., and other markings that I'm going to say are a mixture of West African, Arabic, Hebrew, and other things, right? And kind of like a trade language that's been melded together. That's my opinion on the matter, right? But there's a lot of people that talk about a trade language, right? There's a lot of sources talking about like mixing like Maghrebi Arabic, Hebrew, and Patois, of which I'm going to get into in a whole nother video. But what the point is that that's a large swath of language and cultures right there being represented from the slave trade in one spot. In one spot. And people who built this church, people who left markings on this church, and people who descend from this pathway of the slave trade. It shows the blending of peoples and genetics that happened. It helps explain why a lot of people's DNA, not everybody's DNA looks the same. There's some people who was like, oh, you know what? You're like you're straight from Nigeria. You're straight from here. Like it looks straight West African. Okay, cool. There's some of us to where we have the mix of like the West African and the East African and the North African. So how do we get that? How does that work? So places like the First African Baptist Church, aka the Ethiopian Baptist Church of Jesus Christ, helps us understand this history. So in modern days, it is the First African Baptist Church. After a hurricane, the steeple got knocked down, you know what I'm saying? And they had to make do with what they had or whatnot. But this is the current incarnation of the church in terms of its name, etc. Now, Anonymous Hebrew told me that while on the tour of First African Baptist Church in Savannah, that he was told of an Ethiopian narrative concerning the crosses found at the church on the stained glass windows. He said that the earlier crosses were Ethiopic in style, but changed to a more conventional style of cross as time went on. Y'all can see these crosses right here. So these are pictures that Anonymous took while on his tour. August 3rd, 2019. So for everyone who wants to understand the chronology and timeline of this thing, this is how long we've been involved in this. August 3rd since 2019, since way before the so-called UA community was getting involved in this, right? So I want people to hear that and understand that. But these are pictures that Anonymous took on his cell phone from 2019 at 1:57 p.m. And these are more clear pictures of the same exact stained glass windows. So on the tour, he was told that these crosses here represent an earlier style that represent the Ethiopic aspect of the church, right? So Ethiopian Baptist Church of Jesus Christ had Ethiopic crosses at its early onset, or at least that's how the narrative from the church goes. I have yet to confirm that these are Ethiopic crosses, but as of yet, that's part of the narrative, right? And it gets a bit more interesting, right? Because when Dr. Ephraim Isaac came out to the church and was also looking at pictures in the documentary, The Cryptic Quest, he was able to potentially identify Ge'ez letters on the pew, saying in the documentary, he was able to potentially identify Cha, Sa, Ra, or Ri, and potentially Na. This is important to note, being that there is again, like I said, an Ethiopian narrative connected to the First African Baptist Church. Of an even more interesting note is that these markings are more than one pew. Excuse me, one more time. What's of interesting note is these markings are on more than one pew, the same ones on multiple pews, which it gives more credibility to the fact that they're made on purpose and they're not just scratchings or markings that are just happenstance. And again, understanding the Ethiopic connection with the windows, with the stained glass windows, and also the name of the church, and then also the fact that, again, like I said, the genetic connection to the East African slave trade. Yeah, these are things we got to seriously start looking at. Dr. Ephraim Isaac also gave a cultural context of repetitive prayers based upon single letters. This cultural context becomes important to note when considering possible ties to the Ethiopic crosses, like I said, in the church, and the potential of Ge'ez script on the pews. There was a particular pew that may prove out to be an example of such, with the potential Kaf being potentially written in succession. So not only does he give this cultural example, there's a potential example of this in Hebrew on the pews. So this pew here, this is something that I'm hypothesizing. This is you put this one on Orthodox more, right? So no one else is saying this, so don't put this on anyone else. You know what I'm saying? This isn't someone else's, like, cockamamie idea or whatnot. You know what I'm saying? This is me jumping out the window, right? And like I said, I wish we could have been talking about this for the last year. But you know what? Before I get into this, let me play something from Dr. Ephraim Isaac from the documentary, so you can kind of get a little bit of an understanding of what I'm about to say. Real quick. Just to give a little bit of context. This isn't terribly loud, so you might have to turn this up a little bit, and I apologize for that.
The use of alphabetic symbols in magic is very well known, it's very ancient. In Ethiopia, for instance, already in the 4th and 5th centuries, they were using decorative letters, not directly in terms of symbolic 3 or 4 words, letters, but in terms of a geometric figure. A lot of the early magic, what we call abracadabra, they are not complete words, but they are letters. There is one prayer that is I mean, they use just a few of those words, and sometimes it may be just like ha 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 la 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 ba 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 ga 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 ga. This is, of course, the way of enticing the demon and defeat them.
So yeah, he gave that context there, right? So I'm going to give my thoughts on that context, right? In particular, and this will make more sense when you see me do another video later. But for those who know about Psalms 119, this is where we kind of get the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, like to where like the first words in the sentences in succession begin with one letter. Like, so you get like a bunch of sentences beginning with the aleph, a bunch with the bet, etc. So there's one there. The section with the kaf, right, is Psalms 119, and there's a few verses here that I'll go through beyond 84, but 81 through, and you'll see here. But this is how it first starts, and I want you to think about this. So Dr. Ephraim Isaac gave the concept of a single letter prayer, right? Like you're saying something and meditating on something over and over again, right? And so this is a potential concept of what the prayer could mean in the head, right? Or what it's a short form of, or what it's a shorthand form of, right? So I want you to hear this and think about this from the concept of the mind of a slave or someone being oppressed, right? So this is how it starts off with the kaf, etc. Then it goes, my soul fainteth for thy salvation, but I hope in thy word. Mine eyes fail for thy word, saying, when wilt thou comfort me? For I am become like a bottle in the smoke, yet do I not forget thy statutes. How many are the days of thy servant? When wilt thou execute judgment on them that persecute me? The proud have digged pits for me, which are not after thy law. All thy commandments are faithful. They persecute me wrongfully. Help thou me. They had almost consumed me upon earth, but I forsook not thy precepts. Quicken me after thy loving kindness. So shall I keep the testimony of thy mouth. Now, obviously, there's literally no way to corroborate this in terms of concept. So we run into the same issue that everyone runs into in terms of trying to come up with the translation for what's on the pews, is the people who put them there did not leave in an oral tradition or in writing what they meant by those markings. So again, I cannot definitely say that this is what is meant by these markings here, but I'm putting forth the possibility of what they could mean, right? And in particular, I'm talking about these markings at the top of the pew. To me, it seems like there's some practice letters or some practice tries at these markings, and then a final go at the top, or you have like a potential maybe teacher-student thing popping off, right? No idea. But I am saying this, though, in terms of a hypothetical. I take the position that there is a case to make for a Hebrew kaf in either some form of block Hebrew or Judeo-Arabic. Again, like I said, Anonymous Hebrew identified many potential kafs in 2019 in cursive Hebrew. So again, between the two of us, we're saying cursive Hebrew, which he's saying he positively identified. And I'm saying that there's a potential form of block Hebrew and or Judeo-Arabic on this particular pew. And even more particularly, please listen to this. It may potentially be some form of Judeo-Bantu or some form of West African Judeo-Arabic. As of yet, there wouldn't be any. This would be the first representation of such in the Americas, and potentially in Africa. There's the Hebrew language, wherever it goes, it blended with wherever it went. So in the Islamic speaking world, in the Islamic world, in the Arabic speaking world, you see a lot of different forms of Judeo-Arabic from multiple forms, right? Like in North Africa, there's multiple forms of Judeo-Arabic, East Africa, etc., Yemen, etc., all them kind of things, right? It makes sense that they're if there's Hebrews in West Africa, that you're going to find remnants of some form of Judeo-Arabic somewhere, of a West African sort. The same thing if there's going to be Hebrews amongst a Bantu tribe, you're going to find some form of a Judeo-Bantu somewhere. In this context, is given cultural credence by Cohen Hamandishe, right? Who also added the cultural context that after leaving Yemen, that the Lemba kept a secret language with songs, etc. That the Lemba believe this language is either a Hebrew or connected to Hebrew. And like I said, Cohen Hamandishe also claims that the Lemba were on slave ships that went to America. So what am I meaning by all this, right? Like, so the Lemba, like, so for instance, that they speak where Cohen Hamandishe is at, I believe they speak Shona, right? Which when I figured that one out, I was like, yeah, I really got to look into this East-West thing in terms of like Angola, from Mozambique to Angola and whatnot, because we see how Shona, the language, spreads and whatnot, right? So we, really got to look into that. But when I heard that they came from Yemen and they still retained some form of a Hebrew language, maybe even Aramaic, etc., right? But they kept it as a secret language, right? It made sense to me to where, like, how with the Hebrew in particular, how knowing, like, for instance, that like Arabic was like the lingua franca of West Africa, right? And North Africa, etc. Even in the Iberian Peninsula, Arabic took dominance over a lot of stuff, right? However, if we're gonna see Hebrews with like an east to west migration from like the Ethiopian, Yemen side or East Africa side through Central Africa or South Africa to West Africa, it wouldn't be unheard of to have this clinging to Hebrew in like a song form or a prayer form or a secret form. And even to the points where it gets degraded to where like you might only get down to the letters, right? So going from like having full words and full songs or whatnot to like having prayers just going down to the letters or whatnot. And I could definitely see to where some form of something that you're going to do in terms of trying to keep your tradition alive is going through the alphabetic side of it. And recitation is a big part of Hebrew culture. No matter what side of it you fall on, recitation is a big part of the culture. So I could see where like reciting the Psalms or reciting, like I said, that Psalm 119 where you're getting a double entendre, where you're keeping the language, but you're also keeping some very spiritual, profound stuff there. I could see a plausibility for that all day long. But again, there's a lot of cultural context given here from East African Israelites. So again, this is important to understand because, like I talk about, there's East Africans taken in the transatlantic slave trade to the West. East Africa was a late participant in the transatlantic slave trade. In the 1770s, the French began to regularly trade in slaves in the French islands of Mauritius and Reunion, islands east of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. From points on the east, on the East African coast, slaves were taken in small number for a century prior to, but when planters in Saint-Domingue, a French colony on what is now Haiti, demanded more labor, this slave trade became more regular and systematic. I'll supply this link down below for this article as well. The parentheses are me, not the article. That's all me. During the 1780s, the vessels used to transport these slaves grew to be able to carry up to 1,000 slaves. Between 1789 and 1790, the French triangular transatlantic East African slave trade reached the peak. And you know what? That part in white is supposed to have parentheses on it. That's me. Reached its peak when 46 ships carrying more than 16,000 slaves circumnavigated the Cape. Almost all of these ships were bound for the sugar and coffee plantations in northern Saint-Domingue or Haiti. Yeah, just wrap your mind around that, fam. So again, we're talking about ports from Mozambique and Madagascar. So in between them, we have Mauritius Island over here, or around them, we have Mauritius Island, we have Reunion as well, and we have the Comoros Islands, right? And so you can also see this is Angola, right? So this is what I'm talking about, like how it's not that far to get in between the two, right? But also, like, again, we got 500,000 people coming from over here, fam. 500,000 people. The French were getting it in for the longest going to Haiti, and then the Portuguese come in and really ramped the thing up, fam. Really ramped the thing up. Now, what's also important to understand about this concerning like history, right? Like, so in history, we know there's a Haitian Revolution, right? From 1791 to 1804, right? So what happened with this Haitian Revolution is a lot of slave owners took their slaves and left Haiti and went to the Americas and other places. But places like Georgia, for instance, right? So in the book Making Gullah by Melissa L. Cooper, she is a Gullah historian from Rutgers. She got Rutgers University. She is from Sapelo Island. She was also featured in the PBS documentary about the Black Church when they did a part about First African Baptist Church on Sapelo Island. Not in Savannah, but on Sapelo Island, which was built in 1865, I believe. But she says this in her book, Making Gullah, which I think is very interesting to note here, right? So she breaks down, let me see here. From the first group of Africans brought to the islands by Patrick McKay in 1762 and those who slaved for John McQueen to the Africans brought to the island in 1791 by the well-seeking partners of the French Sapelo Company. From the hundreds of blacks enslaved by famed cotton planter Thomas Spalding to the Africans who came to the island as property of ship captain and slaver Edward Swarback, and those brought from Saint Domingo by their master, John Montalet, in the wake of the Haitian Revolution in 1805. Sapelo Islander ancestors had always been engaged in a temporal struggle for their freedom and autonomy. So it's confirmed, like, there's this connection with the French Sapelo Company, right? Which definitely needs to be investigated. But there's definite proof of people from Haiti, slaves from Haiti coming to Sapelo Island in Georgia. So it would stand to reason they come to other places as well. But we're seeing again, we're the traffic from Haiti coming over, but we also see the direct, so there's slaves taken directly from the East African ports to American ports. So we're getting both. We're getting them coming in again from the Caribbean and also from the American, going straight to America. Now, why we see this being corroborated in the story of Billy Simons. So a lot of people didn't take this story seriously because of where he said he came from. He said he came from Madagascar. Billy Simons is the first mention. It says here the first mention of a dark-skinned Jew in the United States was a mulatto Jew in 1668 named Solomon, the first Jew to live in New England and perhaps the offspring of an African slave mother and white Jewish father. However, the more well-known first recorded Jew of African descent in the United States was Billy Simons in the 1850s, a scholar in both Hebrew and Arabic. Pause right there. Hebrew and Arabic. Born in Madagascar in 1780 and reportedly from a Jewish African tribe, a claim supported by two cantors and other authorities. He was purchased into slavery by white Jewish slave owners and brought to South Carolina, where he proceeded to become the first admitted black member to a white shul in Charleston. The constitution of the same shul, Kahal Kodesh, Beth Elohim, infamously stated that it accepted any member provided he, she, or they are not people of color. So he said he came from Madagascar. And again, I can't, I'm definitely going to stress the Hebrew Arabic part at one point in a whole nother video, but yeah. So we're seeing this being corroborated now by slave records, etc. So that's Uncle Billy Simons on the left there. We got Cohen Hamandishe and some Lumber people in the center right there. And these are some Comorian people from the Comoros Islands, right? And look at their clothing. So if Uncle Billy Simons made it from Madagascar, it's totally plausible that you could have seen Lemba coming on slave ships coming out the ports of Mozambique. That's totally plausible. And if they spoke Shona, right, and there's a slave route going from east to west potentially, right, with the Portuguese, it's not implausible that they could have made it on slave ships in West Africa. Because we got to remember, fam, there's a lot of slave routes at this juncture when we're hitting this part of the slave trade, right? That have been around for a long time in East Africa, and now in West Africa, they're just starting to get built with the Europeans and whatnot. And so I've definitely got to investigate this part a bit more, but it seems extremely plausible to me that there's going to be a heavy slave route through South Africa, Southeast Africa to Southwest Africa, from Mozambique to Angola. That only makes sense to me. But like I said, I got to go look into that a bit more. Now, what's interesting is in the documentary, The Cryptic Quest, and I'm sorry for how blurry this is. I had to take this off of the video that Garfield put up and whatnot. It wasn't the greatest of qualities, you know what I'm saying? But this is where Ephraim Isaac starts pointing out the ha, the sa, etc. on the pews and whatnot, right? Now, what's interesting about it is he points like it's the same letters on multiple pews. So here's one picture of one pew where he's pointing out the ha and the sa, etc. Now he's pointing it out on a whole another pew. So that's two pews. All right. Here's another look at the same pew. It's two pews with the same letters on it, right? Now, here's a third pew. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Third pew with the same lettering on it, right? Same markings on it, right? And we see that right here. Now, the rest of this potentially says, La ilaha illallah, or there is no God but Allah. So on one pew, we potentially have Arabic and Ge'ez. On one pew, we potentially have Arabic and Ge'ez. I just want people to think about that for a second. And what that could mean for potential trade language when we're seeing one marking on multiple pews. We see the same markings on multiple pews. Like there's certain markings we find on multiple pews. So when we're also talking about like the 9-patch, potential trade languages, and also codes or whatnot, these repetitive markings become really, really interesting to understand, because one of the cultural contexts of understanding this, of these markings in the church, etc., is its connection to the Underground Railroad. So we potentially have a full or a partial communication system for the Underground Railroad, like in this church or whatnot, potentially made of a trade language of East and West African Semitic languages, and maybe even more, maybe even West African scripts, right? Maybe even more. But again, this is why we have to slow down and not just throw the baby out with the bathwater with a whole bunch of emotional arguments and a lot of stuff. We really need to recognize that this church is a national treasure for people who came off slave ships and their descendants. There is a treasure trove of things to understand about culture and experiences and how things were actually constructed in terms of what people practiced and how they worked together for freedom. This is a lot of different cultures we're talking about blending and coming together in one spot to make one culture, to make one people, to unify for singular goals like let's help free people, etc. Beyond the Israelite thing, etc. Does this church, is it important to understand in terms of potential Israelite connection? Sure. Yeah, 100%. Is it also important to understand it just in terms of an African connection? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so it serves as a model, and the Gullah Geechee culture in particular serves as a model for different African peoples of different lineages, etc., like we are. The blended Africans that we are, coming together and peacefully making culture and making things happen and working together to survive and hold each other up. Like, so for instance, I was watching a video of some Gullah activists talking to each other, right? One Gullah activist is a Muslim, one of them is not. So part of the Gullah Geechee culture is like the blend of Islam, Christianity, and West African traditions and whatnot, right? So the one who was not a Muslim greeted the Muslim Wassalamu alaikum. With no issue. And the Muslim had no issue speaking to the non-Muslim in Gullah. There wasn't a beef, there wasn't contention. And that's an aspect of the culture that you would expect to find with people who were working together to free other slaves. So again, family, this is a treasure trove for the people. This is a national treasure for anybody who descends from people who came off slave ships. Complete national treasure for that. Complete national treasure for that. We really need to look into this Ethiopian Baptist connection concept, right? What that meant for the people. We need to look into this connection to the East African side of the slave trade. And how that interplayed into our culture and genetics and whatnot, and who we are as a people. There's a lot of people who want to pigeonhole us just into West Africa. And not all of our history comes from just West Africa. Not all of our genetics just comes from West Africa. And there's a lot of us who are connecting to other things in other parts of our genetics. And we don't even know why we're trying to until we get DNA tests and we find out, oh wow, I do got genetics that comes from this part of the world. Wow. It's okay to accept all of that. And that's one of the beautiful things about this church is it cracks the code for everybody. It's the primer in cracking the code. We can literally see the fingerprints of a bunch of different cultures, East and West African, in that church. And we should have been talking about this for the last year straight. And there's literally been no reason why we couldn't have. There's no reason why we couldn't have. I'm going to be coming out with some information real soon that should have also came out in the last year, to where we could easily be shutting down these conversations of, well, did anyone come off the slave ships practicing X, Y, and Z? Oh, we could easily show that. That's not a problem. But it's a problem if it's in an inconvenient language for people. So like I said in the previous show, I can easily show that kind of information, but it's going to be in Arabic. But once you understand that Arabic is one of the multiple languages of the people that came off the slave ships. Like, so for instance, in the Lorenzo Dow Turner's book, Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner's book, about the dissecting the Gullah language and whatnot. Again, there's 21 different tribal languages he marks out there. 21. We shouldn't be offended about finding any one of those languages because we know it's verifiable that them people came off the slave ships. So if we find records that verify our story in any one of those languages, we should take that, because information is information. Like, because I speak English, that doesn't make me British. Because I write English, that does not make me British. Because I speak or read or write Arabic, that does not make me a Muslim. And we need to understand that, fam. It makes me somebody literate in that language who came off a slave ship. And this is what we could have been talking about for the last year. And God willing, I'm going to talk about it for the rest of this year. But with that, family, I appreciate y'all for coming through. I pray y'all were edified. Let me see if I got any quick questions I can see in the chat. Nope, none that I can see. But shout out to everybody in the chat. I appreciate y'all for being here. One more time, if you do want to donate to Hamandishe and the Ball Ministries. The information is down below. I will be working on getting some email information to make sure that all the different applications that are there are easy for everyone to donate through. But with that, family, I appreciate you for your time. Appreciate your questions and comments. And with that, I say peace and love.
I like the way this feel, yeah. Let my soul cry, yeah, yeah, yeah. Minister, we gonna speak from the heart on this one. I'm performing lyrical funerals, no obituary. I killed your boy and brought him back to life. Pet cemetery. My anointing not based on attendance at a seminary. Scarlet witches, they attracted to the visionary. Everywhere I go, I bring the word with me, missionary. Soldier drafted in the war machine, military. Pay attention, what I'm saying to you, legendary. You got the demeanor of a front desk secretary. That mean you take the calls, but you don't make the calls. That's why you hate, cause ain't nothing fake about me at all. Now I dare you try to say that with a straight face. My delivery in tip-top great shape. I'm too advanced for you, light years, space age. No evolution for you cavemen, stone age. I'm a thoroughbred, rock solid. I came from the bottom to the top, rock climbing. I grew up in the hood, pros and cons. That's that full court pressure when the amalanche roll out that stretch. Why can't you see it's not logical? And you live diabolical. Boy, your point of view smaller than the hair follicle molecule. This for all of them that follow you, smoking all of them barbecue. When I pull up, your voice on correct itself with no auto-tune. I got a whole nother level that I can enter whenever I gotta deal with the devil. I pick a whole nother method. I hear a whole lot of yapping. They wanna see my reaction. Really out here in the community making it happen. I don't really think they understand the dilemma. They ain't looking at the man in the mirror. I can't say it any clearer. The plan is very simple. It's time to start playing in the temple. Before somebody come and put the can on your temple. Reaching like a baby with his hand for the nipple. The Grand Reaper coming with his hand on the sickle. In the van coming with a ram with it. When the van come and get him. I am so glad that I changed up. Made it out of where I came from. Watch for the slide and the hook of the slow ball, fastball, and that change up. That ghetto lifestyle, it changed us. Go back to visit, it ain't changed much. Only difference is now the way that my brain process information. And Satan, but after my license, day one, let me say something. Only reason that I'm still alive today because God's grace is amazing. Just another raisin in the sun. Dream deferred when things occur. Now you getting served right on the curb like a lemonade stand. I just gave you the benediction, let the whole church say amen.